All right, everybody, this will be the first video on Rousseau's social contract. I'm not going to be walking around because I've been schlepping all over London, where I'm at right now, and my legs really hurt. So we'll start off talking about the state of nature. This is a term that philosophers use to describe the state of things before there was political society. So before there is government, before there is any kind of organized structure to society, when people were basically living as nomads. Now, one thing to say is this is kind of a thought experiment. The philosophers we're talking about lived in the 18th century, so they didn't really know Thomas Hobbes, John Locke, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, so they didn't really have access to anthropology and couldn't really confirm what people actually lived like. So they sort of surmised, what would life have to be like without government? So different people had different takes on the state of nature. Thomas Hobbes, for example, thought it was a complete state of war where there were limited resources, and so everyone is fighting for the same resources that they all cannot have, so they end up killing one another, and he famously described life as nasty, brutish, and short. Rousseau, on the other hand, has a more positive outlook on the state of nature. He said that nature provides a bounty, so there were basically more or less unlimited resources, and so people didn't fight with one another. Nevertheless, they still had some motivation for forming society. So, the question is, why did people bother to form society? And Rousseau says that people were basically equal in the state of nature because they had equal ability, and they were basically free. There was natural equality and there was natural liberty. But we join society because we want better versions of those things. We want what's called civil equality, and we want civil freedom or civil liberty. So there is motivation to form society. Now, the question that Rousseau is asking in the social contract is whether or not there is any kind of legitimate political authority that has a basis in nature. Is there anything in nature that we can look to that would support the idea that certain people get to rule over others? And what he says is there is no natural political authority. He, as you saw in the discussions, entertains three possibilities. The idea of parental authority. Now, he says, number one, parental authority. He says that parental authority is a real thing. And the reason why that authority is legitimate is because children are dependent on their parents. And so when you have a dependency relationship, that gives rise to a legitimate kind of authority. But eventually, people grow up and they grow outside of depending on their parents, and so they become free. So parental authority can't be a basis for political authority because it's only temporary. He also entertains two other possibilities that are pretty similar. The master-slave relationship, in which some people, let's say in the state of nature, might have forced other people to be in their service. Now, that might have happened in the state of nature, but there's nothing legitimate about it. It's just one person overpowering another person, or some people overpowering other people. So that can't be legitimate. The third possibility is this idea of might makes right, the idea that a natural strength, which is usually physical strength, gives someone authority over other people. He says, just because a person is stronger than another doesn't justify their dominating another person. So just to be clear, what's the difference between master-slave relationship and might makes right? Well, in the master-slave relationship, you could be dominating another person through the use of physical force, but you don't have to. Maybe you're smart enough to get someone to become your slave, where you could be a physically weaker person, but you use other devices that would, oppress that person. So of these three possibilities, parental authority, master-slave, and might makes right, none of them provide any kind of legitimate authority. And that is really what Rousseau is after. Not just any authority, but a legitimate authority, a justified authority over some people over others. And so what he says is, there is no basis in nature for that kind of legitimate political authority. The only basis that we can come up with is something that arises not from nature, but from convention. And convention is just another term for social practice. So political authority is not natural, but rather it is conventional. It is made by agreement. And of course, as you can tell by the title of the book, there is one central agreement that he says establishes a legitimate political authority, and that is the social contract. And of course, in the state of nature, there is no social contract. There are no real obligations. You can pretty much do whatever you want. So, again, for individuals to want to join society, there has to be some kind of legitimate reason. And Rousseau says we are free and equal in the state of nature, but what we hope to become, what we hope to have, is a better quality, freedom and equality, better versions of freedom and equality under what he calls the civil condition, under the condition of civil society. So, the social contract is what establishes legitimate political authority. And he says on page 24, I'm quoting to describe the social contract, "Each of us places his person and all his power in common under the supreme direction of the general will, and as one, we receive each member as an indivisible part of the whole." So, what is created by the social contract are citizens and legitimate political authority. The legitimate political authority is called the sovereign. Now, sometimes he speaks of the sovereign in a way that suggests that it is sort of like one person, but the sovereign is everybody. And if we were in society, which we are, but in the society that Rousseau discusses, we would all be part of the sovereign. That means that we would have a role to play in creating law, because the sovereign, insofar as we are citizens, we get to vote on the laws and we get to participate in those laws. So the sovereign has power over us, but as citizens, we are the ones that help create that power. So citizens are every individual member who agrees to the basic terms of the social contract. And the basic terms are, if in the state of nature I have absolute freedom to do whatever is in my capability of doing, I have to give up that absolute autonomy. I have to give it up, and I have to agree to live under the scope of the law that is created by the sovereign. So I can no longer do whatever I want absolutely unchecked. I can only do whatever is within the scope of the law. But if the society is a good society, then it will create freedoms and it will create more opportunities for me to do certain things. So, in the state of nature, you're basically preoccupied with food and shelter, and you're worried that, possibly other people could take that from you. But with the social contract, what you have is more assurances that your freedom will be preserved by the force of law. And we are equal, we have civil equality, because whereas in the state of nature, we were only equal basically in ability. He says that some people might have been stronger or faster or smarter than other people, but basically everyone has a more or less level playing field of basic intelligence, such that if someone was bigger than you, maybe they could, let's say, climb a tree. If they were bigger and quicker, they could climb a tree and get to bananas and coconuts and other resources quicker than you. But since we all have basically the same kind of capacities for intelligence, a shorter person, a smaller person, could use a stick and get the bananas or coconuts down that way. And so basically, he thinks that we have a quality in our ability to reason and counterbalance the natural physical inequality. In civil society, we get a better kind of equality, a more nuanced kind of equality. That is called civil equality. And that means we get equality under the law. So once again, natural liberty is the freedom you are born with. You are free to possess and take and hold on to anything that you are able to do. Civil liberty is what we gain. It's the freedom that we gain through the social contract. It is the freedom you have under the laws you agreed to as a party of the social contract. You are free to possess whatever the property laws and other laws say is yours. And you are free to do whatever the laws do not prohibit you from doing. So the question is, why is civil liberty better than natural liberty? Because it makes, and the answer is, Rousseau's answer, page 29, is that it makes everybody conventionally equal under the law, right? Because for Rousseau, freedom and equality go together. If we have freedom but no equality, then only some people have freedom. And that's not a good thing because we want everybody to have freedom. If we are equal but not free, that is not desirable because we could all be, let's say, equal slaves and have no freedom. So being a free and equal citizen are the basic terms of liberal society that all citizens are said to enjoy, or, a privilege or rights that they have. So secondly, civil liberty is better than natural liberty because Rousseau says on pages 26 and 27 that it makes people moral beings instead of merely being just human animals. And we are now moral because we are using reason, our sense of reason, to follow the laws, and we agree through the use of reason to follow those laws because we recognize that we get a better quality freedom, a better quality equality when we have civil liberty, civil equality. And thirdly, somewhat related to the second reason, civil liberty is better than natural liberty because it encourages people to act rationally rather than arbitrarily. And they act rationally because they are obeying laws and rules instead of just following their whims and desires. And this idea of reason being a capacity that is really developed through rule following is a theme that you'll find in lots of philosophers, particularly Kant. So one of the things that philosophers say that differentiates us from other animals, other kinds of beings, is our ability to follow rules that arises from our capacity to reason. Okay, now I'm going to start talking about what the sovereign is and what sovereignty is. So Rousseau says that sovereignty has three central characteristics. It's inalienable, it's indivisible, and it cannot be represented. So the first, sovereignty is inalienable. According to the social contract belongs to people collectively. Authority belongs to people collectively, right? The authority is created when everyone says, I agree to give up absolute freedom in favor of civil freedom, which is maybe in some sense a lesser quantity of freedom, but it is a better quality of freedom, right? So because that thing arises collectively, it cannot be given up. It cannot be alienated. And by the way, alienated means to separate. So if people start alienating the authority that arises from the social contract ceases to be legitimate. It's sort of nullified or negated when people alienate their freedoms that they should enjoy to maybe some other body, or let's say some other political body, or some other particular person, right? So we cannot give away our freedom without destroying the social contract. Secondly, sovereignty is indivisible. Just as this legitimate political authority cannot be given to anyone, it also cannot be divided up into separate areas of responsibility among the parties of the social contract. So that's more what I was just talking about, let's say, giving certain people in society more power than others. everybody has to have the same freedom and equality for citizens to remain truly free and equal. According to the social contract, then, people have collective political authority, and so they must always exercise collective political responsibility for everything. The third idea is that sovereignty cannot be represented. This means that people cannot elect representatives to make their laws for them, because to do so would once again be to alienate their sovereignty by giving it to the representatives. And as Rousseau already explained, sovereignty cannot be inalienable. Cannot be alienated. So this is an important distinction between the kind of political society Rousseau envisions and then our own political society. As you know, we live in a representative democracy, which is more of a sort of representative republic than it is a true democracy. A true democracy, like what the ancient Athenians enjoyed, as we saw in the Apology, is what we call a direct democracy. That means every citizen would be able to vote on every single issue. Now, sometimes certain laws are given to the public to vote on. There could be a referendum, there could be, a ballot initiative that says, should we increase taxes to pay for a new transit system or something like that. And in different states, legalization of marijuana has been put on the ballot. I think in Florida and California, it has been put on the ballot. But by and large, we have our representatives, our congressmen, our senators, to vote on laws for us. So in that sense, we're not really a true democracy. We're not truly a direct democracy. We're a representational democracy. And Rousseau doesn't really like this because he sees it as individual citizens alienating their freedom and giving it to certain representatives, whereby those representatives end up having more power, and the integrity of the democratic system is then thrown into doubt by certain people having more power than others. And I think if you take a look around at society and some of the problems that we have, you could probably see how representation plays a role in creating some of these problems. So for Rousseau, ideally, everyone would vote on every law. Now, you might think, I don't know what you think about that, but a lot of times students say, I don't know if I would like that because that means I would have to pay attention to every law, and it would mean I have to, research every law and stay up to date. And from what I hear from students, people don't necessarily want to do that. Not just students, I think a lot of adults and even older people don't necessarily want to do that because it's extra labor, it's extra intellectual labor. But, Rousseau would say in response to that, yeah, but that intellectual labor is the very thing that preserves our freedom. It's the very thing that preserves the integrity of our democratic system. And if we want to truly be a free society, of free and equal citizens, then we should want active political participation in our system. Okay, and I'm going to start winding this down, but getting to the question of what political system Rousseau favors, it is, of course, a direct democracy. A situation in which everybody votes on all the laws, and everybody... and basically a simple majority is sufficient for laws getting passed. There are basically different ways to structure votes. You could have a supermajority where 2/3 of people voting would have to vote in order for a law to be passed. You can have a simple majority of people who vote. I mean, as you might know, not every citizen votes in every election. So in any given election, the majority of citizens do not elect representatives or the president. It's the majority of voters that elect it. And as we've seen in previous elections, including the most recent one, it's not even always a simple majority of voters because of the Electoral College. And the Electoral College is another example of a sort of representational system rather than a direct system. Okay, so what we talked about in this video was what the state of nature was, a pre-political state of affairs that, for Rousseau, isn't horrible, but it isn't ideal, and it's not ideal because our freedom and equality is not assured. So, in order to create legitimate political authority, citizens come into a contract with one another, a compact, a covenant with one another called the social contract. And the basic terms are, we'll give up some of our freedom in order to get a better quality freedom and a better quality equality in return. And by the way, let me just highlight some of the things you get from society. So you get military and police protection. You get things like libraries and roads. I mean, Missouri State University is a publicly funded state university. So the reason that it's not as expensive as other universities is because the state subsidizes it, and it's cheaper for you to go there for that reason. So that's another thing you get. Did I mention libraries and public parks and sometimes public museums that are free? You get these kinds of things. And also you get things like this, you know, certain professions and lifestyles are simply not available in the state of nature. So you couldn't be a police officer in the state of nature because being a police officer is predicated on civil society. You couldn't be a professor in the state of nature. You couldn't be, let's say, a dancer. I mean a dancer in the sense of someone who does ballet or an opera singer, because all of those are supported by social institutions. Now, could you sing and dance and attempt to philosophize in the state of nature? Yes, but you wouldn't necessarily be a dancer in the way we talk about being a dancer, because you have to have things like dance halls and dance lessons and mentor relationships and different styles of dance that really arise up out of culture, which more often than not arises up out of organized society. So in addition to basic protections that we get from being free and equal citizens under the law, we also get lifestyle opportunities that are not really available in the state of nature. So the point is we have a lot of reason to join civil society and leave the state of nature, even if we have to give up some freedom to do that. We become, and when we do, we become part of the sovereign. So, people sometimes say very critical things of the government, and they talk about the government as if it's this big faceless machine. And, no doubt, sometimes it is. But what's key to democratic thinking is recognizing that, in some sense, you yourself are part of the government. Insofar as you are a citizen that helps make the laws, you play a role in the creation of the government. Also, any particular government agent, from a police officer to a statesman to a president, they are also a citizen. So any one of us, if we meet the qualifications, could be a congressman or a senator or a president. So we have the ability to participate in the government, and we are, in that sense, a part of it, even if it doesn't always feel that way. But that's, at least in theory, in the theory of the social contract, that's how it should be. So the only thing that creates legitimate political authority is the social contract, because there is no legitimate basis in nature for legitimate political authority. Okay, next video I'll talk about the common good, the general will, and more things about the voting process. All right, hope you guys are having a good week and a good summer so far.